Welcome back, pre-algebra students. We're in lesson 107 with Roman numerals. So let's talk about the fact that the Romans did not use the base 10 method that we use today. They used a different set of numbers other than the Hindu Arabic numbers that we use. And so they used the following symbols. So they used the Roman letter or the Roman numeral I, and that meant 1. And so this is a symbol. I'm going to go ahead and just make you a little chart here. This is a symbol, and this was the value, okay? And then they used the letter V, and that meant 5. They used the number or the letter X, and that meant 10. They used the letter L to represent 50. They used the letter C to represent 100. And a C that came from their percent. We use percent, so that's out of 100. That's where this comes from. Centurions, there were 100 centurions in a legion. Or there were 100 in each whatever group they were in. So C was 100, and that's kind of where they derived that letter from. D was 500, and M was 1,000. And they use these groupings in their number system. Now, what you're going to ask yourself is, how did they make numbers between 1 and 5 if they didn't have numbers for them? So what they would do is they would use multiples of a number. So if they wanted to write the number 2, they would write 2 i's, and that was equal to 2. And usually they wrote it like this. If they wanted to do the number 3, they would write 3 i's, and they put a cap on it, and it looked like that. But for 4, they did not use 4 i's. Instead, what they did was they used a method of addition and subtraction for these letters. So if the letter was to the right, it meant addition. If it was to the left, it meant subtraction. So if you had a smaller number to the left of a bigger number, it meant to subtract it. So that means that IV, you have a smaller number to the left of a bigger number. This meant 4. If you have the smaller number to the right, it means to add it. So this was subtraction because the smaller was first, and then you had the larger, so you were subtracted 1 from 5. Here it means to add 1 to 5, so that would be 6. Okay. Same thing is true for all the rest of these. So if they wanted to say, if they wanted to say 9, they would put the Roman numeral 1 and the letter X next to each other. And because the smaller number was on the left, they would say take 1 from 10, and that would equal 9. And that's how they would do that. If they wanted to say a really big number, like let's say they wanted to say 1,543, they would start with 1,000. That would be M. And then they would do the 500, which would be D. So that's the smaller number to the right of the larger number. So that's 1,000 plus 500. And then they would take, instead of having 4, they never used 4 of any number. They would use 3 at the most. So they would have written X and then an L, because 10 from 50 would be 40, and then they would do 3 ones. 1, 2, 3. So this would literally be 1,000 plus 500 plus 50 minus 10, because that's what this meant, 10 from 50 plus 3. And that's how they would do their numbers, was using the letter system there. And it was a method of addition and subtraction combined that would give them the result they needed. So that's how they would have written 1,543. Was MDXL3. All right, so those are the symbols and how they would use the Roman numerals. And again, the rule was no more then 3 of any letter. That was the first rule. And the second rule was smaller number first equals subtraction from the second number, from the next number, from the next larger number. So having the smaller 10 in front of the 50 meant to subtract 10 from 50, just like we have here, 50 minus 10. All right, and it's something that they got used to. It might seem a little complicated, but it's something that they were used to. It was a system that worked for them, and it does work for making most of the numbers and most of the numerals. That's how they thought of them and how they grouped them in their heads. When you're used to it, it's what you're born with and what you're used to using, it makes sense because it's what you're accustomed to. It's just like learning a different language. If you grow up speaking Italian, then it's not complicated to you. You know what you're doing. But if you are an English speaker and then you try to learn Italian, it might be confusing and hard at first. And it will take more practice than someone who was born into it and was used to it all their life. So the same is true for the two different number systems. When you switch from one to the other, the second one is going to take a whole lot more practice than the one you're born into. So let's do a couple practice problems using these rules. I'm going to clear the page. And the first one, we're going to write it's 107.1. We're going to write 3493 in Roman numerals. Now, you probably are not going to have to use Roman numerals in your life, but if you ever become an archaeologist or someone who is reading Latin text, you're going to have to understand this because a lot of the times they use the Roman numerals in old stuff and in excavations and in old texts and old documents. So this is something that it's good to have an understanding of, especially if you go to the museum. Then some of those things that you see there, you'll be able to understand because they'll be using this old stuff, these old numerals. So first we write what they mean here, right? We write out our key. So here's our key. I is 1, V is 5, X is 10, just to remind ourselves of what they are. L is 50, C is 100, D is 500, and notice they kind of have a base 5 system going on here. So they have 1 and then they have 5, and they have 10 and they have 50, and they have 100 and then they have 500, and then they have 1,000. Okay? So if we want to write 3,000, then we need to have 3 M's because the rule is no more than 3, right? So we have M, 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 that's 3,000. Now we need to have 493. Well, 490 is just 10 less than 500. So we could put X and then D. So that would be 490 because 10 from 500 is 490. And then we would have 1, 2, 3. So that would be 3 times 1,000, right? Plus 500 minus 10 plus 3. And that is how we would do that. Now, the other way that they might have done that is they might have said, you had a couple of different ways, which is why the Roman numeral system didn't work, is because, yes, this is the most succinct way of doing it, but unless somebody grouped it like that in their head, they might write it differently. So you would still have the 3,000 because that makes the most sense. So you'd have 3 times 1,000, right? But somebody else might break the hundreds into a category and say, okay, plus C, D. So that would be 500 minus 100. because C is 100, right? So that would give them 400. And then they would do 90, and 90 would be 40 and 50, or 10 from 100. So then they could do XC, which would then be 100 minus 10, right? And then they would have 1, 2, 3. So plus 3. So that is one way that they could have written this number. This is the easier way to have written that number. It's the way that I would have done it if I were back then, maybe. But this was also a way to do it. So the same number could be written multiple ways, which was kind of confusing. And again, why this numeral system did not stand the test of time the way that the Hindu Arabic number system of 10 digits that has a place value did. The place value system just makes more sense, and it's much more flexible than this Roman numeral system because there's so much variation between the two. They're the same value, but one is written with fewer numbers or letters, and one is written with more. So think of being a student and trying to figure this out, how to use the number system and all the different ways it could be written. That could be frustrating, right? And there's even another way that you could have written this, if I'm thinking about it right. You could have said 4,000 minus 500 minus 100. You could have written M on the end, and you could have subtracted everything from the front. So it'd been crazy, right? But anyway, let's do another one just for funsies. 107.2. And we're going to write this. D, C, C, L, X, I, V in the Hindu Arabic system numbers. So let's get our key out. So let's say 1 is I, 5 is V, X is 10, L is 50, C is 100, D is 500. And we don't have any M's, so we're going to skip that. We don't have to write the M down, but we know M is 1,000. So we have D, so that's 500 plus, we have 2 100s, so that's 200, plus we have 50, so it's 50, plus 10, plus, now we have a smaller number in front of a larger number, so that's going to be the larger number minus the smaller number. So that's going to be 500 plus 200 is 700, 50 plus 10 is 60, and 5 minus 1 is 4. So the answer is 764. And that's how that works. All right, that is all we have for lesson 107, Roman numerals, and I'll see you in lesson 108.